We're now speaking with Paul Kent, who is Chief Commercial Officer at Amedeo. Thank you for visiting with me at Air Finance in Dublin. Paul, the A380 recent order was big news. Amedeo has been a long-time interested party in the 380 program. Could you share a sense of this order, what it means, what it doesn't mean? How do you guys see it?
Well, the first thing to say is that it's a positive step. It's always good for any aircraft program to gain further orders and to prolong its production life cycle. In that sense, we regard the situation as relatively positive. What we don't think is that it's a panacea for the A380 program in the round at this stage. There's still some way to go in order to put the aircraft onto a sound footing, but this is a good step in that direction. What it does more than anything else is it gives Airbus some increasing flexibility in terms of production life cycle, production rates, and allows us to look at a longer term future of the A380 in production. That creates opportunities that will come about behind that, and those are the key things in terms of the development of a positive future for the A380 program. So there's already some positive dialogue with airlines out there for additional orders that are coming in behind this Emirates position. The market rumour, I can't comment on its accuracy or otherwise, is that the scale and volume of those orders may well be a little bit bigger than the market expects, and that would be a very good thing indeed. I think what the Emirates order achieves is, firstly, it reasserts Emirates' commitment to the programme, something that I think we've all known, and certainly those of us that have been involved for a number of years have known the strategic importance and significance of the aircraft type to Emirates, and they continue to be the paradigm example of what can happen when an airline commits to a business model that's driven by the A380. It can be extremely successful if you are bold enough and strategic enough to make a positive decision in that direction. Others, I think, who have the right characteristics in terms of constrained hub environments, a need to transport more passengers through their home airport, are going to need to increasingly consider the aircraft as we move forward over the next few years.
This suggests some support for the rumour, BA.
I can't comment on that or otherwise. It's not a situation that we're directly involved in, but I can clearly see the business case for a constrained airport like London Heathrow, and a need to transport more passengers being achieved by larger units of aircraft capacity. So it's not a huge leap of logic to see how that could be made to work very effectively from British Airways standpoint. I understand that already 10% of all passenger traffic is transported through Heathrow in A380s, so I can only see that increasing as we still wait, and we're still some time away from any increase in runway capacity or terminal capacity there. It takes time to get that into the system, and in the meantime, the only way to effectively grow is probably going to be larger units of aircraft capacity. But it's not the only example. There are other examples of capacity-constrained airports out there where the incumbent operator at certain airports could certainly benefit from larger units of aircraft capacity. We can also look at markets that are constrained on an infrastructure basis. The one that springs to mind most readily is obviously the Chinese market, wherein airport capacity is not going to keep pace with the rate of passenger traffic growth, and again, that cites a need for ever increasing gauge in terms of aircraft type. The A380 now looks to be on a stronger footing as a consequence of the Emirates order, and that may give the opportunity for some of these potential opportunities to come to fruition in a way that I think would be significantly positive, and therefore, we are not characterising the Emirates order as the paradigm shift that the programme needs. but we are characterising it as an important step to ensure the longevity and create the opportunity for these other opportunities to come in behind it.
Okay, before we go back to the Emirates order, what do you think Airbus needs to do to ensure the 380 remains competitive? The 777X is clearly going to put pressure on the airplane. For some people, the 350-1000 could put pressure on the airplane. But I think that the argument for constrained airports, the megacity argument that Airbus makes, is a valid one. But what else should Airbus be doing to keep the airplane top of mind?
I think the biggest challenge for a lot of airlines in assessing the A380 is overcoming the increased cost risk that comes with the break-even challenge. You can look at a business model like Emirates, and you can say that Emirates has very much grasped the nettle of that opportunity and have seen all the benefits of the increased upside associated with the A380. But our experience over recent years has been that that's not where the rubber hits the road in terms of airline decision making in favour of the aircraft. The key driver of airline decision making appears to have been more risk mitigation than upside capture. And the higher break-even load factors that are associated with A380 in that context are something that Airbus has not been successful in convincing airlines to take the initiative on. Even though if you get there, obviously you have a significantly greater reward on the upside by virtue of the larger units of capacity. One of the reasons why I think that's a problem is that you need to convince airlines to overcome that simple constraint, and that some of that is actually embedded more in the structure of the industry than it is in terms of specific management decision making or risk aversion at an airline management level. You may have seen that we've talked about a concept of an airline for airlines. Now, what that actually is a recognition of the fact that airline business models are currently constrained by A, their own route network limitations, and B, their own capacity issues and utilization limits that they can engender from that on the aircraft.
Doesn't the airline for airlines, doesn't that idea also essentially de-risk this decision?
Certainly it does. But if you look at global A380 daily utilization figures right now, they're just north of 13 hours per day. Now, that's actually not terrible, it's okay, it's reasonably efficient, but there's clearly a lot of upside in that in terms of could you make route networks that are more efficient, that get you closer to 17, 18 hours of daily utilization and capture all the intrinsic cost benefits that are inherent within that. Now, because airline business models are on an individual airline basis constrained by their own route network and their own bilateral traffic right limitations, it's actually quite difficult for many airlines to do that. You can take the example of an Asian airline who fly into London Heathrow in the morning, have to put the aircraft on a remote stand for the duration of the day and wait for the peak departure wave in the evening to fill that aircraft and fly it out. All the time that aircraft sits on stand throughout the day, that's fallow time in terms of utilisation, and the aircraft is not making money. That's not an intrinsic fault of the A380, that's a problem associated with the airline's ability to run that aircraft in its own route network. Beyond that point, if you could take that aircraft and fly it in a revenue service rather than having it sit fallow on a remote stand for the duration of the day, you would increase daily efficiency, you would increase revenue opportunity, and you would significantly de-risk that decision-making associated with the aircraft. And that's what we're trying to address when we talk about an airline for airlines. We're talking about connecting route networks in a complementary fashion so that we increase utilization, and that will follow on in order that we can offer to airlines a significantly de-risked proposition for the use of A380s. And that would basically consist of not a long-term commitment as you might see in a typical leasing model, or an even longer-term commitment as you see in an ownership model. Basically, those airlines who are looking at the A380 on an ownership basis are having to make fleet planning decisions that are 25 to 30 years in length in terms of their commitment to the aircraft type. We're talking about taking those principles and turning them into maybe a 3-year, 5-year commitment. And that 3 or 5 year commitment would be to guarantee break-even load factors on the aircraft, but at a cost base that reflects the better utilization that we would be able to make of the aircraft in a combined route network. So if you imagined that we could take daily utilization of the aircraft from 13 hours up to maybe an average of 17 hours, that's something like a 25 to 30% increase in cost efficiencies. Now, we'd share that with the airlines in question so that their break-even cost base becomes lower. But on the revenue side, they'd be selling the tickets, they'd be owning the passenger relationship, and crucially, they would capture all of the upside associated with selling the increased seats on the aircraft. The airline for airlines concept that we're talking about makes its profit by taking some of that margin between its more efficient cost base and the marginal cost base of the airlines as improved by that offer of the guarantee of break-even load factors.
It's a very novel idea.
It's a novel idea and it has its intricacies, but at its heart are some fairly standardized things. Passenger environments on an aircraft are becoming increasingly commoditized. An airline operating within the confines of perhaps an alliance structure is a quite familiar thing. Code-shares are a quite familiar thing. Product commoditization is developing. We know that a business class seat these days in most international passenger traffic context consists of a lie-flat bed, a good IFE, a little bit of personal space, and reasonable catering, most of which is outsourced anyway. If you can simply replicate that model, you can deliver the onboard experience. And in the context of so doing, you can make the airline comfortable that you can reach their product delivery requirements that they would have in order to allow you access to their passengers. Now, if at the same time as doing that, you're able to achieve a greater cost benefit than they can achieve on their own through their own individual networks, you can offer them a cost advantage, a revenue advantage because they retain all the upside associated with operating a larger aircraft.
Slot advantage.
A slot advantage because they have the opportunity to consolidate positions. And in so doing, effectively, we create a more effective global business model for the A380. That creates secondary market use opportunities that go beyond a standard remarketing procedure.
Based on what you're saying, what pops into my mind here is SkyTeam and One World between, let's say, Heathrow and JFK, where the combined airlines within those alliances have amazing amount of traffic every day, but they also have an amazing amount of operations every day, which could be made more efficient.
Yes.
Okay, so if I can, just to jump back to the Emirates order, it was interesting that a couple of things that were interesting. Firstly, there was very little detail on the order, which fine. One of the items that jumped out was no engine selection, so it would be interesting to see what Emirates is going to do. And the other thing, of course, is the order for the 380. We know this is 380 plus. Tim Clark has said he doesn't want that. He would take up to 200 Neos. Airbus doesn't see a business case for that. I guess that's pretty easy to understand. So, two things. Let's start off with, what do you think this 380 is actually going to look like in 2020 that Emirates will take delivery of? I think it's reasonable to assume it doesn't necessarily look like the one that's flying now. There may be some things, for example, you might get the plus winglet anyway. It might just be standard by then.
I think that's a production decision for Airbus to make. As I understand it at the moment, Emirates hasn't opted for that configuration of the aircraft, and that may be because there's a commercial issue underlying that. Airbus is undoubtedly trying to price for the plus configuration, and maybe that Emirates didn't see the benefit associated with that at source. Those improvements are relatively small improvements in terms of the overall operating economics of the aircraft. And whilst all improvement is good and continuous improvement should be pursued, and indeed is very often pursued by the major manufacturers in terms of how they progressively develop a product over time, the reason I think Tim Clark is arguing so strongly for an A380neo is because he's trying to create a paradigm shift in economics, an order of magnitude of maybe 25 to 30%. Now, as it stands with the existing A380, at least our understanding and appreciation of the circumstances are that there's no technological shift available in that 2020 timeframe that you speak of, wherein you could create an economic benefit of that order of magnitude. I think what a progressive order position such as the one that we're seeing is about is advancing the program to the mid to late 2020s and giving engine technology the opportunity to make the kind of paradigm shift that would allow us to think about maybe a 380neo at that point in time. Of course, whilst that happens, the passenger traffic growth is also continually kicking in, markets are getting bigger, infrastructure is getting increasingly constrained. The case for larger aircraft will be progressively being made. It may be the case that where people have talked about the existing A380 as not necessarily an aircraft of its time, an A380neo in a 2026 to 2028 timeframe may well be an aircraft that looks attractive for the manufacturer in terms of its development cycle.
Obviously the big issue to get to that 25% kind of improvement is going to be engine driven. Now, the Emirates did not specify an engine. They bought a lot of GP engines. Now they're on a series of Rolls-Royce engines. There's clearly going to be a competition. Engine Alliance tell me that they reckon they can get another 1% out of the GP engine. Rolls-Royce is much more careful about saying what they can do with the engine. They say they're at spec now, and their latest version of the engine is the one that is now powering the deliveries going to Emirates at the moment. Any thoughts on what these engine makers need to do? Do you need to go to a geared technology like Rolls-Royce is talking about in the future? What does this mean for the program if you need essentially this paradigm shift in engines?
Well, I think we're really talking whether it comes through geared. Obviously, gearing is an interesting technology, and the question to which it's scalable up to wide-body engines is an open question that no one's quite answered yet. It's one potential paradigm shift in the economic performance of an engine. There's concepts of core shrinkage and larger bypass ratios, and maybe there's a limit to that. There's concepts of advanced materials like advanced ceramic cools and so forth, which again will increase efficiencies, but I don't know that we have a line of sight yet on that significant step change in technology that would produce a 25 to 30% specific fuel consumption benefit, such as would be the goal, I think, if you're going to significantly enhance the A380 product program. Certainly in the technology presentations we've received from engine manufacturers, we've not seen anything that suggests that they have those programs significantly advanced, that we could be looking at engines in the near term or even the medium term that would exhibit those features. As to the Emirates order position, I fully expect it'll be a competitive position. I think Emirates has the option of two engines, and it will exploit that to the fullest extent possible. Certainly, as we know Emirates, so we would not be surprised to see them hold the respective manufacturers' feet to the fire in each case in order to get the best transaction. They do already have a mixed fleet, and in that context, they have the direct operational data and all of the support experience to draw on, so they know exactly where they stand. And I think we'll see an interesting competitive process take place. I think the questions on either side are to what extent is the alliance committing to continue its involvement in the program. If they push very hard, then I expect it'll be a very competitive process, albeit that we don't yet know how far they're willing to continue their support for that program. On the Rolls-Royce side, they have to overcome some issues that they've had. I think they've largely done that already in terms of performance specification and so forth. That said, I think they've got the resources and the wherewithal to do that as well. So it'll be about which of the manufacturers makes the best case to Emirates that it's going to support them for the long term.
Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.